Hello, everyone. Welcome to Not So Dumb Blonde. I'm on a mission to help women stop trying to fix themselves and start understanding themselves by relearning how to not suppress or explain away their feelings and needs through evidence-based healing modalities, conversation, and community. So whether you're navigating relationships, career stress, healing from your past, or simply just feeling overwhelmed by your inner world, this space is going to be for you. I'm Caitlin. I'm a soon-to-be therapist, and I'm currently working towards my master's in social work. With an additional master's in international relations, it helps me bring a global and systems-based lens to women's mental health. I've worked with teenage girls in inpatient mental health settings, and I've helped hundreds of women in Denver find community and resources. This podcast will discuss trauma, attachment, emotional regulation, boundaries, and relationship patterns in a way that's real, evidence-based, and actually usable. Because healing is not about fixing yourself, it's about learning how to work with who you already are. Thank you for being here.
Well, hello, retired good girls, and welcome to an episode of What I Learned This Week as a Master's of Social Work grad student training to become a therapist who is also a full-time caseworker out in the community. My name is Caitlin. I am your host, and I'm going to try my best to continue this part of the series best I can. The podcast is growing, the community is growing, which I'm super excited about. I have expanded to doing interviews with professionals and women out in the mental health community and other inspirational women as well. And I really want to start doing this weekly or bi-weekly series where I just give quick updates as to what I've learned this week and give updates to what is going on and also share resources for women out in the community and who are listening to this podcast and who want to be a part of the Retired Good Girls Club. So let's go ahead and get started. So I am taking my couples and marriage therapy course right now, which I am so excited about because that is definitely one of the reasons why I wanted to become a therapist, was to also support women and really helping them manage trauma in their relationships and understand the best way to navigate that. Because one thing that I found is that so many women, especially ones who have complex trauma, a lot of them feel really good in most all areas of their lives, except for when they decide to get into a relationship. And relationships truly are universally at the core of our human nature. We all were created to connect with other individuals, be attached to other individuals, and have intimacy. So sometimes I notice in today's society, a lot of people kind of reject this idea of needing to be connected to another person. And I do think that it's been glorified to a very unhealthy extent, freedom and independence and not needing relationships. It is, in my opinion, again, I am not a doctor, I am not yet a therapist, but this is in my educated opinion as at a master's level, is that is coming from fear. People who continually speak about not needing to be attached, not needing or wanting a relationship. Again, also going back to that Vogue article of having a boyfriend is embarrassing. While I do find that there can be some truth to that, right? I have also found that oftentimes a lot of this narrative comes from fear and protecting oneself from potentially being rejected or not being able to reach the goals that they truly desire in terms of love and intimacy. But I digress. That is just my personal opinion. And I think that humans, we need connection, we desire connection. And I think that the more that we accept that, normalize wanting connection, normalize being needy, normalize having these emotions and desires to feel close to someone, to feel supported and feel safe with someone, the quicker we are on the path to authenticity, which is what this podcast is about, and on the path to stop trying to minimize our needs and stop trying to fix ourselves and really just stepping into who we really are and learning how to speak up for that, set boundaries, and just be our most authentic self. So I just wanted to start off with that. I'm going to get into a couple things that I learned this week. Again, going back to my marriage and couples therapy class, I learned a lot about cognitive behavioral therapy for couples and EFT, emotion focused therapy, which is huge right now because it's based off of the attachment theory and is really derived from that, from Dr. Sue Johnson. So I'm going to go into a little bit of both of those. I'm going to talk about what I learned, how it pertains to women, and how it pertains to women in relationships. But before we get started, I do want to make a couple announcements. I am offering discounts for anyone who wants to go ahead and start their therapy journey, but doesn't really know where to start. It's with Talkspace. That's how I started my therapy journey. And I'm telling you, there's no way I would have been able to start without it, just because I do not have the time or the energy to call different providers, call insurance agencies, and get matched with a therapist. And it can take a lot of time. So Talkspace does it all for you. You can start with or without insurance, and it will match you with a provider based on your preferences. If you don't like that provider or clinician, you can go ahead and swap it out for another one. It's super easy. If you're interested in that, you can use my code SPACE80. I have also released a dialectical behavior therapy inspired workbook to help women speak up for what they need in a way that feels safe for both them and the person that they're speaking to. So if you are looking to stop spiraling and learn what you need and how to speak up for it, if you are trying to learn how to set boundaries, if you're trying to learn how to feel more comfortable speaking up for yourself and what you need in a relationship in a healthy and safe way, this is going to be for you. If you're interested in that, you can find it in the link in my link tree. So let's go ahead and begin. Cognitive behavior therapy for couples. So I learned a ton from Dr. Richard Stewart, which honestly, cognitive behavior therapy for couples was really interesting to me because I've heard a lot about cognitive behavior therapy. I talk a lot about dialectical behavior therapy, which is kind of like the sister of CBT, but I've never really looked at cognitive behavior therapy for couples and how that can relate in a relationship or family dynamic, which is what I was able to learn so much more of this week and why I'm so excited to share it with you. One of the things that we talk about a lot and getting into CBT for couples through a woman's lens is that women are really socialized to self-blame. Women are taught to be the emotional regulators, maintain connection, and fix relationship problems. So when something feels off, the default becomes, what am I doing wrong? We've talked about that a lot. CBT reframes this into, you're not the problem. The pattern is the problem. One thing that Dr. Richard Stewart had mentioned was that these problem behaviors that we all innately have as human beings that we want to change are actually solutions. They are solutions to and the purpose of CBT, one of the purposes of CBT is to very clearly figure out, okay, what is this problem behavior doing for me? What purpose is it serving? Because it is always serving a certain purpose or helping someone reach a specific goal. He maintains that one of the ways of fixing the problem behaviors that we are looking to change is by figuring out alternative, more functional and pleasant ways or pleasant behaviors to get to that specific goal that a client is wanting to get to. So a very good example of this is sometimes we all have behaviors. For example, a person who is maybe feeling neglected in their marriage or maybe overcritical in their marriage may resort to working too much. What is working too much, which we would use as the problem behavior? What purpose is that serving the individual? And what purpose is it serving the relationship dynamic and system? Once you determine what the purpose it is that it's serving and how it's serving a particular dynamic and system for the relationship, the clinician can help find other ways and other behaviors that may be a little bit more healthy and conducive to the relationship that can still help get that need met. And so that's one of the things that DBT really focuses on. Dr. Richard Stewart also says that thoughts and feelings and problems within an individual and a relationship are complex, but the solutions are not. And so that's something that I have found to be particularly interesting about what Dr. Richard Stewart had mentioned was just that it's really not that complicated. The solutions are very easy. And if you're working with a cognitive behavior therapist who is very in tune to what's going on, it can be very easy to map out what's going on and come up with solutions to the problem. So again, going back to problem behaviors, women exhibit often come from overfunctioning. So this is framed very clearly: over communicating, over explaining, over apologizing, over initiating repair. This is something I've seen across doctors and psychologists going through theory, that it is more common for women to be placed in those roles. Not always, but it is more common, or at least back in the day when these studies were being created. I think some of these were like in the 80s and in the 90s. It was pretty explicitly explained that women were the ones who were mainly in these roles. This can often turn women into being labeled as being too much, nagging, or too emotional. The cognitive behavior therapy lens for this is that these behaviors, again, are solutions to anxiety, disconnection, and instability. So a good example would be, if you're repeating yourself because you're trying really hard to feel heard. If you are over explaining, what you're really trying to do is trying to prevent conflict. Make sure that you feel understood. Make sure that you're not missing anything. It's also a false sense of control that if you over explain everything, then you might be able to fix the relationship problems. Initiating every repair or trying to restore safety. Sorry, let me backtrack on that. Initiating every repair can actually just mean that you're trying to restore safety. So, reframing those thoughts is going to be really important. Some of the patterns that women really get stuck in: women tend to overfunction, and then the other partner tends to underfunction. The woman does more, and then the other partner tends to do less. By the way, I'm only talking in heterosexual relationships right now, just for the purpose of this particular interview, but this can go the same for same-sex relationships. Dr. Richard Stewart actually found that it does not change in same-sex relationships. These needs and desires and these patterns show up in both same-sex and heterosexual relationships. One partner feels criticized, and then the cycle just continues. The cognitive behavioral therapy insight is that both behaviors are maintaining the system, right? So the person who is overfunctioning and trying to fix the relationship is just a part as the system, and the pattern as the person who is underfunctioning or avoiding the emotions in the relationship. The hard truth to this is that when women are overfunctioning, it is most certainly unintentionally enabling the underfunctioning, which is exactly what they're trying to avoid. This is not at all to blame women. This is about empowering women to know that you actually do have a choice in having the awareness to understand of where you are putting yourself in the pattern and as a part of the conflict cycle that you're trying to break. So a really good reframe for this is, again, the part that you're contributing to is not the problem, but it's the place that you have power to change the dynamic. So it really takes us out of this victim mentality, which is also so interesting. Dr. Richard Stewart says that cognitive behavior therapy really does not work for people who have a victim complex. Cognitive behavior therapy really empowers people to to stop looking outside of themselves for solutions and saying, well, I can't fix this behavior because so-and-so keeps doing this. I can't do this because this keeps happening. He says that a victim mentality is really one that will inhibit a person from making any sort of change or growth. And the real power and the real change comes to accepting that you actually have the power to control and manifest and create the life and the behaviors that you want. And it starts within you and has nothing to do with anything that's happening outside of you. So again, that's very empowering, but it can also be really hard for people who aren't necessarily ready to have that mindset. And so there can be a little bit of work to get there. But he also mentions that a lot of change starts with all of these little tiny micro-social moments, which can also be why women tend to really burn out. Women are often hyper aware of emotional tone and constantly adjusting in these micro moments. The issue is that they are doing all the 700 to 900 interactions emotionally alone. Dr. Richard Stewart mentions that there are between 700 and 900 interactions daily between a couple. And his reframe is, okay, if you just focus on these small micro moments and focus on, instead of the 700 to 900 interactions, focusing on just 20 interactions a day, where you are acting as if you already have the relationship that you already want, or you already have, your partner is already acting the way that you want them to. You already have that relationship, and acting in just those 20 small moments to start is what kickstarts change. It helps with not overwhelming the couple into thinking about this massive change that they need to make all at once, but just starting with these micro moments. So for women, you don't need to fix everything. What you need to do is stop overfunctioning in every moment and choose intentional change in some of those moments. Again, just starting with those 20 micro moments. He also comes up with this idea of the caring days method, which is a really important reframe for women. He goes into talking about his own marriage and how quickly things change from minutes to hours. The moment, if he notices that they're having disconnection, and that there's this energy between them that seems to have a little bit of friction. If he starts to act in ways that the relationship is already how he wants it, he really just very quickly creates this dynamic that changes and flips that energy almost immediately. So the Caring Days method really focuses on acting as if your relationship is already in the way that you want it and just really kind of stepping into that role. This is really important because women have been taught to love harder, be nicer, and fix with effort. But really, the reframe is that caring behaviors should not come from desperation or fear of losing someone. They should come from choice, stability, and self trust. So, cognitive behavior therapy, there's a couple quotes that I wanted to just speak on before I move over to EFT. And one of the things that Richard Stewart also mentioned was that cognitive behavior therapy is the process of problem analysis, which is really interesting because, as I mentioned before, the problem behaviors are really just solutions. He talks a lot about how back in the day, way back in the day, thoughts and feelings were really thought to be as separate. Like working with a therapist was really kind of like, let's not deal with the feeling, let's just focus on behavior. But what he found was that thoughts and feelings are not separate and that the thoughts and feelings are precursors and the consequences of behavior. And you cannot address any sort of behavior without addressing the thoughts and feelings, which I found to be very interesting because cognitive behavior therapy, just like DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, really focuses on thought reframing as well. Again, another very interesting thing that I learned from Dr. Richard Stewart is he says that John J. Haley, who is also a psychologist, said that any attempt to change an individual also includes changing a couple or a family dynamic because changing an individual creates counterforces in a family or a couple dynamic. So essentially, even if you come into therapy on your own, it's never really just about you. It still includes other relationships in a person's life. I think we're ready to get into a very popular intervention method and a very popular theory of couples therapy, which is emotion focused therapy or EFT, founded by Dr. Sue Johnson. And I really want to get into this one, and I want to be careful with some of the things I say because I've always been a huge supporter of EFT and attachment theory. EFT is derived a lot from attachment theory, so I think that it is very reputable and very highly regarded in the therapy community. And it's something that I have found to change my own life personally in relationships. But there's also some things that I learned where there's a little bit more nuance to it as well to just be aware of. So let's get into it. Emotion-focused therapy, again, Dr. Sue Johnson. Women are often labeled as being too emotional, and EFT is really going to focus that narrative from emotions are not the problem. They really are just the roadmap. EFT focuses a lot on being vulnerable, and your emotions are often accurate signals of disconnection. They're not overreactions, but how you're expressing it may not be coming out as the true emotion or feeling that you're needing. It may be coming out as being, critical or being defensive or in some cases withdrawing. The deeper truth behind this idea of you are too much that women are experiencing. A woman may say, you don't care about me. What she really means is, I feel disconnected and I miss you. Something that my therapist told me that has just stuck with me, that I will never forget, is she said that, when you're feeling reactive or you're feeling angry, it's because you are avoiding being vulnerable about something. Anger is a secondary emotion. So one thing that really helped me on my healing journey and something that I think about often is when I start to feel reactive or angry or critical or defensive, I ask myself, wait, what am I really feeling? And what am I afraid to be vulnerable about? And what am I afraid to really say? It is so hard when you don't have the tools, or if you haven't been to therapy, or if you haven't learned how to communicate properly or have that modeled throughout your life. It's really hard to say, I feel really disconnected and I miss you. I mean, even just saying that right now, it feels so vulnerable. It's much easier to say, I don't feel like you care about me. Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? And it's really about getting to the core of how we're really feeling and focusing on the deeper attachment need that is not being met. This goes the same for the flip side. Dr. Sue Johnson also states that it's assuming that that it is critical to have the assumption of good intent of your partner. So when you express a need and your partner shuts down and maybe views what you're saying as being critical, even if you're just trying to get that need met, right? Of having that intimacy and that closeness. It's about looking at your partner that they too also see things through that lens of the deeper attachment need that is not getting met, and understanding that some of that defensiveness and pulling away, Dr. Sue Johnson says, is not because they don't care about you or because they're trying to hurt you. It's because their deeper attachment needs are not being met. Oftentimes, the withdrawer or the avoider who is getting defensive will feel like they are a failure and they're failing in their relationship. The reframe would be to say, instead of getting defensive and explaining and, going on a defense trial in the argument, it's saying, you know what, I feel like a failure right now. I feel like I'm not good enough. Again, it's a very hard thing to say, but when couples can reframe the communication and reframe their thinking, then it can be really helpful to get down to the bottom of it and build that sense of security and safety that everybody needs. And I just want to reiterate again, everyone needs this sense of safety and security. It's not just you or Sally Sue down the street. Oh, she really no, we all need it. We just have different ways of expressing it and getting those needs met. And some of us are more honest with ourselves than others about really needing that. But this is where things get a little bit complicated, a little bit spicy on my end when I was listening to this. Something that kind of struck with me was that, idea of assuming, right? The therapist is always supposed to assume the good in the couple, right? Assume that both sides of the couple have good intent, that neither of them are maliciously trying to harm the other. EFT also urges that couples view their partner in that way of them not having ill intent and being able to have that empathy with their partner. I think that this can be problematic for both men and women, but specifically for women in couples therapy. And this is something that I feel like we do not talk about enough. When you're going to a couples therapist, they are trained to, again, assume good intent. That is something that you need to know. If you feel like you're in an emotionally abusive relationship, if you feel like your partner does not have good intent, I believe that couples therapy can be harmful, because the sole purpose of the couples therapist job is to get each person in the couple to understand each other and meet each other's needs. This may look like helping the woman find better ways to express her needs and get her needs met in a way that may not trigger defensiveness in the other partner. That sounds great, right? But it doesn't sound great if the woman has already been gaslit into oblivion, already walking on eggshells and re-questioning in her mind all throughout the day how to make sure she says things perfectly. Make sure she doesn't upset or disrupt anything in the dynamic. Make sure that she doesn't cause defensiveness with her partner so that he doesn't withdraw. That puts the woman in the position to have this false sense of control that she can manage her partner's emotions. And it can, in my opinion, these are my opinions. Again, I'm not a doctor. I'm going to say that over and over again. In my opinion, that can contribute to women abandoning and can contribute to, sorry, my computer was being weird for a second, and contribute again to this fear of speaking up and continuing to recreate these patterns, which I think can be so, so harmful in relationships, because it teaches women, well, if I just say it better, then he'll treat me better, he'll love me more, he'll want to spend more time with me. Well, you know what? If I didn't seem agitated in my voice, then maybe he'd be here with me tonight instead of out with his friends, or maybe he wouldn't be so mean to me or withdraw, or gosh, why do I have to have so many needs? Why do I get so angry? That is just something I really want women to be aware of when they go to couples therapy. Again, the therapist is just doing their job, because you can't go into a therapy session and the therapist can't be like, you're abusive. Like, it can happen after spending a lot of time with a couple, but that's not going to do good for the relationship. And some therapists will call that out, right? But again, it's their job to assume good intent. So I just want women to know and understand that they do have a voice. And if you feel like you are being emotionally abused truly in the relationship and that your partner does not have good intentions, that is something to speak up about, because these techniques only work if both sides of the couple have good intentions. Okay, now that I got that off my chest, obviously I've gone through some of this myself. I'm very passionate about it. So let's talk about why women feel so activated. Women are often more attuned to relational shifts. We've talked about this a ton. They'll notice distance, more tone changes, emotional withdrawal. And it's not always just women, but this podcast is focused on women, and women tend to be a little bit more hyper attuned to this. This is not dysfunction. You're not dysfunctional. This is attachment awareness. So again, let's talk about how EFT says see your partner with compassion. But for women, again, this can turn into excusing harmful behavior, minimizing your own needs, and self abandonment. Just something for every woman to be aware of. You can say, I don't understand why you do this. Or, sorry, women can say, and both men in a couple, you can say, I understand why you do this. I have compassion and I have empathy for you, but it still doesn't work for me. And that is crucial. Dr. Sue Johnson says that, and Dr. Gottman as well, the Gottmans say that in what determines a long-term relationship, the health of a long-term relationship is turning to each other for bids of connection. So again, when you feel dismissed, ignored, or minimized, it creates deep emotional pain. And it's okay that it creates pain. Goes back into that part of being like, I don't want women to gaslight themselves. And EFT says you should not. You should understand that it is not you should understand. It's important to understand that it is okay to feel deep emotional pain when your partner turns away from you and when your needs are not being met, because connection is a biological need. Okay, it is a biological need. So let's start with that. It's okay that you feel a deep need to have these needs met and to feel close to your partner. But again, to end this quick little podcast, this quick little rant, is that women have been given two confusing messages. You're too much and you're not doing enough to fix the relationship. What couples therapy is actually telling us is that your reaction makes sense, your behaviors have a purpose, but the pattern is what needs to change. The core reframe is that you're not the problem and your partner's not the problem. The dynamic is the problem. And this is what we call triadic thinking in therapy, is that there is always a triad to a dyad. So it is the couple versus the problem or some other outside force. And the part that you play in that dynamic is where your power is. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope